Hi everyone, this is Becca from Becca's Music Room. I am a music teacher who talks about teacher tips, teacher life, teacherpreneurs, and all things that might hopefully make your life just a little bit easier. Today I'm coming with something that's a little more in the teacher life section, and I'm going to be doing something called Becca's Book Babble. I like the alliteration, that's why I picked Babble for this title. But basically it's just gonna be some book reviews of things that I have read recently and whether or not I think that you ought to read them soon. I am doing this because I, first of all, just love to read. I have always loved to read. And when I first started my blog a year and a half ago, one thing I wanted to do was have book reviews. And I tried a couple and they didn't go super well. So I know it's not like 100% on brand for my channel, but I would like this to be like an ongoing series where I can just sit down and chit chat with you. I should have made some tea, but I did not think about it. And just talk about some books that you can read to either further your education or just have some fun. So if you enjoy books, then sit down with your cup of tea if you're more on top of things than I am. And here we go. So these books are things that I have read from January until now. I'm filming this at the end of April. Some of them I'm almost finished with, but not quite finished with. And I will have another one soon with some other things. If you have specific book questions, let me know. If you're wondering what all these things are, just let me know and I will be happy to share them with you. I'm gonna start with my nonfiction things. I'm gonna go with teaching stuff and then kind of go towards the more fun stuff. So I'm gonna end with my favorite book so far this year. Ooh, I'm so excited to tell you about it, but it's okay. So this year I have read a couple different things as far as teaching goes. So I read this book. It's called Fair Isn't Always Equal, Assessing and Grading in the Differentiated Classroom by Rick Wormeli. I read this book because I got gifted certified this year. So I had to take gifted classes and one of the classes was all about assessment and differentiation. This was the book they provided for me to go along and we had to do book study things. I wasn't a huge fan. I probably shouldn't have started with this because I really wasn't a huge fan, but it was the first one I read this year. It was one of those it had a lot of good thoughts, but it wasn't super practical. And when I'm looking for teaching books, I want practical. I want things that I can do in my classroom tomorrow. And it did kind of talk about that, but it was a lot of things that I felt needed to be said, but I can't do much about them. So they talk a lot about how our grade books are not set up in the best way. If you think you go from 0 to 100, but 50 or less is failing, that's just the scale doesn't make sense. And I totally agree with that. But at the same time, I can't do anything about that, in my real life. I am not in a position to change that. I get what my county tells me to do and I gotta deal with it. So a lot of things like that, talking about whether or not to let students redo assignments, and differentiating assessments and things where it was really good thoughts, but I wasn't 100% on board, so I would skip that one. Number 2, a little bit better. This one is called A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Ruby K. Payne. I borrowed this from my principal to read, and it's been very, very interesting, actually. I am not quite finished with it yet, but so far it has been so eye-opening for me. I work at a school where I think it's 98%, it might be 96 or 98% of students are on free or reduced lunch. That is almost all of my children. That is ridiculous how high of a percentage that is. And I have read other books about poverty, but I still, I've never been there, so I don't quite get it. And this book was really interesting and had a lot of comments about things like that that I didn't know. It talks about hidden rules of each class. So the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class all have hidden rules and things that they just expect everyone to understand that you don't if you're from a different class. So for example, in middle class society, if something is broken, it is expected that you either know how to fix it or you know how to call someone to fix it. So a lot of middle class people have tools and tool sets and can do those things. A lot of people living in poverty don't don't. Like they don't have tools and maybe have not known how to do that. Now that's not saying everybody, but that's not something that they would necessarily know. On the other end, people in the upper class are just gonna call someone to fix it. Like they're not gonna bother to sit there with their tools. Now, of course, there's differences in everything, but it was really fascinating to see how much I identified with the middle class things and how much I had no idea about it with both the upper class and the lower class. And things like that, it just really opened my mind in talking about different ways of speaking depending on where you're from and what that means in an education standpoint. Now, I posted this on Instagram and I did have someone say like, oh, I read that book and it was interesting, but it wasn't very practical. I do feel like it's kind of practical. It's not super practical, but it was so helpful for me just to understand a little bit more about what my kids are going through and how they live their lives. Not anything bad, but just like it's a lot different than what I grew up in, which is funny. I grew up like all over the country, but still it's just totally different. So I would definitely recommend this if you have a large proportion of students who are under the poverty level. If you only have, you know, like a couple, maybe not. But if you have a lot, like in my school, it's like almost everybody, highly, highly recommend. Very eye-opening and just kind of helps me like have a more open mind when it comes to differences in speaking and acting and different things like that. The next book I am going to talk about, I don't have up here with me. I left it in my husband's office and I do not feel like walking down there and getting it right this second. So it was called From the Ground Up. I will insert a picture so you can see. And it is by the CEO of Starbucks, or I guess the former CEO now. And it was really interesting. I picked it up because I thought it was going to be like, well, it was a business book and it was nonfiction. And so I've been trying to read more business books because I run my own business, obviously, here on YouTube and for my blog and my TPT shop. And I am trying to read more business books just to, you know, find out more. And so I thought this was going to be like a businessy book, and it wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. Instead, it was talking about how businesses can help other people. So he talks a lot about like how like hiring initiatives and starting foundations and stuff like that, and everything's told like a story, so it's not like, well, first you do this and then you blah, blah. It's not boring. It's very interesting to read, actually, but it was not what I thought it was going to be. I probably wouldn't have picked it up if I had known what it was actually about, but I'm so glad I did. It was really eye-opening, really interesting. I feel a little bit less ridiculous spending $4 on coffee, knowing how much Starbucks actually gives back to people. I still find it just a little absurd, but you know. So I would recommend that one, especially if you're looking for an interesting nonfiction read. Not super applicable to my life, but it was interesting. The next one's gonna make me seem so ridiculously nerdy. This book is called Troy, The Myth and Reality Behind the Epic Legend by Nick McCarty. And yes, it is super nerdy. So I found this at Barnes & Noble on like the discount rack. And one thing you should know about me is I am obsessed with ancient Greece. I don't know why. I don't know what happened in my childhood to make that a thing, but I, like, as long as I can remember, have loved ancient Greece. And I love like all different books about Helen of Sparta and all those kind of things. I love historical fiction that is set in ancient Greece. Like, I love all the myths and the legends. I love Hercules, like all those things I am obsessed with. Like, I love them. And so I was really excited to read this book. It was very interesting to me, probably not to other people, but to me it was super awesome because it talks, I'm getting way too passionate right now. It talks a lot about like the Iliad and the Odyssey, both of which I read last year. Huge accomplishment because those are long books. But it talks all about those and like the stories and the myths, but it also talks about how Troy was discovered, which is fascinating, at least to me. You're probably like, oh my gosh, Becca, you are crazy. But I thought it was so interesting because it was this German businessman, basically, and he came down and he was like determined. He was like, this is where Troy was, and they like dug everywhere, and finally they found it. And apparently there were like all these different versions, like Troy kept getting like built and then burned down or knocked down and then built again. And so there were like all these different layers, and it talked about all the different layers and what they think happened, and it just was like super fascinating to me. Really fun. You can tell that the author does not like Heinrich Schultz, who discovered Troy, because he was terrible. He like stole things and like destroyed very valuable things to try to find what he thought was Troy. But if you are interested at all in archaeology or in ancient Greece, I would definitely pick this one up. It was really interesting to me. I know you're probably like, oh, Becca, why? But I loved it. My next book is totally different than that. It is Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham, who is the mom from Gilmore Girls. And it actually says from Gilmore Girls to Gilmore Girls and everything in between. So this is her like second or third book. I know she has like a novel, and I think she has one more nonfiction book. But it was just really, Lauren Graham, I feel, I've never met her of course, but I feel like she's very much like Lorelai from Gilmore Girls. And it sounds like, when you read it, it sounds like Lorelai. Like they talk very similar, obviously, Talking as Fast as I Can. And it was just really interesting to hear about Gilmore Girls and about the revival and everything in between, and like all these other things that she had to say that they were very inspirational and just really cool to read. It was a really quick read. I mean, it's not short. It is, it has 200 pages, which is not very many, at least I don't think it's very many, but I read it very quickly. I mean, it was probably done in like a week. It was just like a really quick read. It was really fun, really interesting, and just a really nice way to get an interesting nonfiction book, and made me really want to watch Gilmore Girls for like the 12th time. My next book is by one of my absolute favorite authors, Jules Verne. So I have this Gigantor Barnes & Noble version, and it is 7 different novels by Jules Verne. And I have now read 6 of them, and I plan to read the last one this year. I've been reading them over a couple of years because, you know, I like to pick it up and I'll read like one novel and then I put it down and read some other things, but I love Jules Verne. I've also read some books that are not in this one. A lot of them are available for free on like just the books app on your phone. My favorite one so far has been, I think it's 5,000 miles on the Amazon, some kind of miles on the Amazon, but that one is my favorite. And it was amazing. I could not put it down. I read it on my iPad, but that's not the one I read today. So this one that I just finished was 5 Weeks in a Balloon. If you don't know, Jules Verne is the author of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and A Journey to the Center of the Earth, and books like that. They're all very adventurous. They're very scientific. He talks about like all these scientific things. I don't actually understand them all, I'm not gonna lie, but I really enjoy them. Like they're just very adventurous and they're just fun and a little bit silly, like, you know, that's not really gonna happen, but yeah, I really like them. This one I read was 5 Weeks in a Balloon, and so it was talking about a scientist, a sportsman, and a servant of the scientist, and they ride in a hot air balloon across Africa in 5 weeks. And so it's like this whole huge adventure and stuff. So what I think about it, I really enjoyed the story. However, my caveat to that is that it is very much an 1800s book writing about people from a different country. And what I mean by that is that it's not very politically correct. Like some of the words that they use to describe the people who live in Africa are not what I would consider to be appropriate. Sometimes they're very rude or just things like that, because they are in that European egocentric mindset of like other people are just not, you know, civilized. Think of like, you know, Pocahontas, they called the Indians all sorts of rude things. So same kind of thing, and it's one of those things like if you can read it and get past that, it's a good story. If that's gonna hang you up because it really is, you know, insensitive, honestly, then don't read it, because I wouldn't go down that path if you think that that's going to be an issue for you. The story was good and I enjoyed it. It was adventuresome, it was fun, and it's very scientific and just, yeah, I enjoyed it. I loved the whole concept, but that did bug me even more than I thought it was going to. I'm like, why are you saying that? You can't say that. So, I mean, you know, there's that in a lot of, you know, like Huck Finn has things like that where it's just like not super appropriate, and just lots of books like that that were written in a time where that was normal and now it's not. So that's my one caveat to that. I haven't seen that in any of the other Jules Verne books, so if you are looking for one, I would highly recommend any of the rest. I really do. I love him. So I'm still gonna say good read if you can get past that one little thing. 3 other books I have read so far are in my Wizard of Oz book. I got this from Barnes & Noble as well. It's the first 5 novels. Caveat, did you know that the Wizard of Oz has like 15 novels? There's at least 15. I haven't actually looked up how many there are total. But I know that they had 1 through 5, 6 through 10, and then 11 through 15. So there's at least 15. This is 1 through 5, and I have finished the first 3 out of them. I have really enjoyed them. They're just fun. I'm not gonna lie. Like, they're just really fun, lighthearted. They're written for kids, of course, so you could totally read one as a read aloud in your class if you want to do like a novel study. I would highly recommend any of the 3 that I've read so far. I've read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is the one we all know, The Marvelous Land of Oz, and then Ozma of Oz. And all of those are really, really good. They're really fun because I am not a child. They're really quick for me to read because, you know, I'm at a higher reading level, so I read through them very quickly. So it's been really nice. I've been kind of alternating. I read like one, and then I read something else, and then I come back and go back and forth. You can even see I'm bookmarked in between because I'm working on number 4, which is Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. So I just started that one, but the first 3 were really interesting. I would definitely recommend those, especially. I don't have any kids, but I would love to read them to my kids because they're just really fun and silly and full of magic and just all sorts of good things in them. So I highly recommend. This last book is my favorite book so far of 2019. I absolutely loved this book. It is called The Four Seasons, a novel of Vivaldi's Venice by Laurel Corona, and it is amazing. I'm gonna do like close up because it was so good. It is a fiction book. It's I think a pretty good length. It's like 380 pages. I like that. That's like enough that it's not super long, but it's also not super short. So it did take a few weeks to read, but it was so good. So it was about 2 girls who are sisters who grow up at the Pietà, which is where all of the Venice girl orphans would go. And if you don't know much about music, Vivaldi actually taught violin at the Pietà, and so they were like really musical. All the girls would perform for a church, and they would have like the rich people would pay them to perform at their houses for parties and stuff like that. And so it talks about these 2 girls and growing up. One plays violin, one is a voice person like myself, and so they just go through and they're like learning music and going through all the stuff of growing up, going separate ways as they get older. One gets married and the other one stays at the Pietà and becomes a teacher. That's not a spoiler, that's on the back of the book, so I feel comfortable saying it. And Vivaldi does make a lot of appearances in the book, and it is just fascinating. Also, Vivaldi wrote a lot of his music for the Pietà. Like, some of his most famous concertos were for these like teenage girls. Like, it's kind of crazy. So I loved this book. It was so interesting, so fascinating. It's like all the things I love. I love historical fiction, I love music history, and so like all those things put together were awesome. Highly recommend. I cannot praise it enough without telling you too many details. So if you do not think you like any of the other ones, definitely go get this one because it was the bomb. I will link all of these books down below so that if you are interested in anything, then you can get them, and let me know down in the comments what you have been reading recently, because I'm always looking for new books. Also, let me know if you like this kind of video because it is a little bit different from what I normally do, but I know that like I'm really into reading. I figure other teachers are probably really into reading, you know, if you can't tell. This is not anywhere near all of the books that are in my house. They're like everywhere. So please let me know if you like this. Let me know what you've been reading, and please like, subscribe, and share if you found this interesting at all, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.